Yeah. As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission. I'm gonna roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains, haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up, fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah. Cause this is my road. Let's camera action, I'm ready to go.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHH-LP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.
Good morning, everybody, and good morning, Harry, to you. It's always good to have you hear your voice and kind of stimulate me for the resonant tones. And I think we're going to talk about resonance in terms of even heart resonance and heart synergy and how the vibrations of your body can kind of just impact your longevity, but without being too much metaphorical. And I hope that Dr. Velasquez and Tisha Johnson and Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton and Sunday Black agree with about the importance of resonance. But your heart resonates, your heart beats, but it also resonates. And how to keep that your heart resonating in harmony, that's really the key. So we can talk about it philosophically, but we're going to talk about it from a medical standpoint as well. And some people might dispute or contest whether the body, mind, spirit has a connection, but we won't go there either today. But certainly we hear about heart health, we hear about the soul, we hear about what pumps through your veins. So what does cardiovascular mean? So Dr. Eric Velasquez is with us. He's been with us before. He's professor of medicine, and I want to talk about his particular title as Deputy Director for Clinical Trials Innovation at the Yale Center for Clinical Investigation here in New Haven. Reverend Dr. Leroy Perry is with us, Perry Jr. I always kid Odinga that I'm a junior as well, so I like to throw in that junior part because we stand on not only our father's shoulders from yesterday, but the men that have preceded us and the women that have preceded us. Reverend Elvin Clayton is here with us as well, pastor of Walters Memorial AME Zion Church in Bridgeport, and both Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton are cultural ambassadors to the Yale Clinical Research Program. And Sunday Black is with us. Sunday is a member of Mount Olive AME Zion Church in Waterbury and a cultural ambassador to the Yale Clinical Research Program. Tisha Johnson has joined us. Tisha's been really running the I would say the gauntlet and the marathon in terms of health and issues and just commitment to this issue. But Tisha kind of deals with the operation. I mean, Tisha, your title is Chief Operation, COO?
And Director of Clinical Research for the Yale School of Medicine.
And so not only the YCCI, but Yale School of Medicine. So she wears a number of hats. If you don't see so many hats on her head at the moment, that's because we couldn't decide which one for her to wear, but she wears a lot. But let's jump into it. I mean, the last time Dr. Velasquez and the cultural ambassadors were on the show this past fall in September, actually I guess almost a year ago now, but we discussed how although there's been many innovations and testing and treatment and therapies for cardiovascular disease, but in spite of that, and I would say it's in spite of those significant advances, heart disease continues to be the leading cause of death for men in the United States. This show is not a morbid show. It's a celebration of life, but how can we kind of lead a healthier life? I can just say as a sidebar, I've dedicated this show to my father who passed away at the age of 56 from a heart attack. But heart disease continues to be the leading cause of death for men in the United States, killing 357,000, actually I'm closer to 380,000 men in 2019. That's about 1 in every 4 male deaths, according to the Centers for Disease Control. Dr. Velasquez, kick us off a little bit. I mean, the goal of the show is really not only to provide information, but to have people digest and imbibe and share the information about how we can take charge of our health and decrease the risk of developing heart disease. We know that diabetes, hypertension, obesity, et cetera, afflict Black men, African Americans in particular, and all kind of contributing to the increasing the risk of stroke. But how do we hear this term social determinants of health contribute to the cardiovascular, let's say, decline and infection? Dr. Velasquez, welcome.
Thank you, and it's really a pleasure to be here with my colleagues across this Brady Bunch room that I'm looking at here today. And again, many thanks to you, Mr. Ficklin, for kind of highlighting these issues that affect all of us, regardless of whether we're on the delivery side of care or on the receiving side of care. We have a lot of work to do, and I would start by saying that when we look over the last 30 years, the advancements in what we've been able to do to reduce the risks of cardiovascular morbidity and mortality are quite profound. From the development of risk factor assessments, the management of those risk factors pharmacologically, and through other means, the development of our intensive care units, which arguably really weren't around 40, 50 years ago, which now do a lot in terms of reducing the risk of a poor outcome when someone has an acute event, a heart attack, or a stroke, or acute heart failure. We've made a lot of advances, but I think what has resisted our advances and requires us to kind of reevaluate our strategies is to reduce what is a yawning gap between the rates of cardiovascular morbidity and mortality among different groups within our great nation. And so, I think while I can say with confidence that over the last 30 years, the rates of morbidity and mortality have been reduced for the country as a whole and for individuals in different racial and ethnic groups, the variance between what an African-American male in the United States or female faces in terms of that risk versus a non-Hispanic white male has remained. So while all individuals have, risk groups have improved, we still have an unacceptable difference between our communities in what expectations we have. And I think that highlights just you mentioned the CDC. I shared some data with my colleagues over the last couple of days, and we are an African American man in the United States is still twice as likely as their white counterpart to suffer cardiovascular disease and death, and that's obviously can't be restated sufficiently, is unacceptable. So again, what have we learned as we've again improved the risk for everybody, but yet but now are exploring why there's still a resistance to all being benefiting the same. I think we're learning a fair bit about the impact of what you mentioned are social determinants of health, and we thought that would be a good topic to explore today with our colleagues. And I'll introduce it, but I think this is not a monologue. This is a dialogue, so I'll just introduce it and highlight some of the terms, and then we can speak and some of the concepts, and then we can speak about how that plays out in real life. So the American Heart Association, which I think has committed itself over the last 4 or 5 decades to really informing the public about about risk and how to manage risk, particularly in different communities, highlights that there are, and this is a little bit a moving target. It's a field that is being built as we speak and continues to improve our knowledge of. But that there are generally 6 topics, 6 social determinants of health. And I may miss 1 or 2, but I think first is our socioeconomic status, and that impacts health in many different ways, and we can talk about that. Social support networks. How do social support networks drive health? And I think no one can speak better to that impact than Ms. Black and Reverends Perry and Clayton about what they're doing as a cultural ambassador program. the effect of culture and language, which impact our accessibility to information. The access to care, because as we know, different areas may have different access to care based on just geographic boundaries. A lot of this relates to residential environment and the environment we live in, and what that experience of living in that environment is for different individuals and how that impacts outcomes. And then constructs, which may not be biologic per se, but are social constructs of race and ethnicity, which drive a lot of the outcome. So these kind of general constructs of social determinants of health have a major impact on our cardiovascular risk and the outcomes of individuals who have disease. And I think it provides a framework. So how does this play out? And I think this is where the American Heart Association has been advancing an acknowledgement of the impact of racial and ethnic features that may drive this. But there is kind of this concept of load, allostatic load. And I think this is one that I come back to. I always forget about it. I come back to it, and that's a fancy term. But the experience that we all of us, how we respond to stressors in an acute phase, in the acute phase, and in a chronic phase. That response to stressors changes our biology, and that, in fact, also may play an important role beyond the specifics related to these social determinants of being kind of a common pathway to these differences in outcomes. So I hopefully, with those initial comments, I've kind of laid the foundation for the discussion. And I think when you step back, while we've had improvements in outcomes, and I would say I'm very proud to be part of a field, and particularly as a cardiologist, to see what has changed from when I started training to now in terms of what we have available to us to impact the lives of our patients and their families. And I think we have so much more that we're learning day in, day out. But how that information has actually, while it's made an impact on health for all, it has not necessarily narrowed the gap that remains between our brothers and different, who may look a little different from each other in the same community. And I think that's where these social determinants can play an important role. As we evaluate them, we can then understand how we can actually work with them and react to them and impact and use them to actually narrow that gap. So that's kind of how I'm laying this out. So I'll stop here and maybe have my colleagues add to that.
Sure, that's very helpful. And just for our listeners and viewers, we're going to spend the last 10 or 12 minutes also about some upcoming, I don't like to use the word trials, just how we can just continue to use science from a discovery standpoint and how people can be involved with that. But Reverend Perry, kind of add on, if you will, if you would, in terms of the social determinants of health. And I don't want to imprison you in terms of your response, but we're interested in how what steps people can take to improve their health, or how communities can do to promote better health, and even what policy considerations that need to be addressed. But with that being said, what kind of thoughts come to your mind as you heard Dr. Velasquez is really, I think, cogent explanation?
I think Dr. Velasquez, I think he is he's on the right track. He's at the foundation of what we are looking at, which usually does not become evident to the people who need to hear this until there's really a pandemic. So what the pandemic has taught us is that those people in power and those people with knowledge and those people without have not been brought to the table to discuss this. And I think that is the dilemma that we find ourselves in. So following up with that, it appears to me that what YCCI does as ambassadors is that we bring everybody to the table with the messaging, just as the FDA and other groups with regards to the pandemic. They brought people of color who would message out how important it is to get this vaccine. And it seems to me that what we need to do is to inform people that it's critical that they take charge of their health. We must inform people about what we understand to be the mortality rate for African-American men and how this impacts their life as opposed to non-African-American men. We have to pull together, it seems to me, not only the institutions like Yale and Harvard and Meharry and Howard, but we've got to pull together industry and pharmaceuticals and agencies that can have an impact in getting this message out and broadening our attention, broadening the scope, and helping others to arrive at the conclusion that this is essential if we are to change the outcomes right now for African-American men and heart failure, cardiac arrest, and all that.
Excellent. Reverend Clayton, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing fine, Tom. Thanks
Good.
for
Good to see you.
having us back again.
Absolutely.
And the staff this morning, it's good to see everyone. Dr. Vasquez and Dr. Perry handled this so well. I'm just going to slide in just a little bit so we can keep the show going.
Just throw a little bit in, throw a little bit into the offering plate. You know, whether it's $1 or $10,000, it goes to a good cause.
But that there is a theme that's riding through this morning, and that is education, inform, and we cannot push that enough. The more people know and understand, the better off we're going to be in terms of social determinants. So if a brother understands that if he listens to his physician about his high cholesterol or his high blood pressure, just keep preaching the importance of why. And then the brothers themselves talk about these matters. Not just leave it to someone else. We must continue as men of color, to continue to talk about the importance of taking care of ourselves. Then we will begin to move the needle.
Excellent. Sunday, good morning. Good to see you.
Good morning. Good morning. So I'm gonna just elaborate a little bit on the education. I think Reverend Clayton talked about it a little bit as well, like the risk factors, diabetes, those things. When we talk about educating our people, we have to educate not just about what the heart disease is, but what are those risk factors? You know, how do we control that? And I know Dr. Vasquez talked to us about this last week. And how do we help our communities to understand that when we just say it's the heart, there's things that are around that, right? And so, yes, diabetes, high blood pressure, different things, different factors that come into play, but also how do you avoid it? How do you control it? And what, you know, how do you look at what you're eating and how you're exercising and taking those steps to make sure that you're healthy so that you can live a long life. The statistics alone is information that I think is so important that we get out to our communities, because it is mind-boggling when you look at the statistics and understand what this means to our communities. It really makes you see full circle, like Reverend Perry said. The pandemic taught us a lot of things, right? So it's things we already knew, but now it's in your face. Okay, so yes, there is definitely an area in which we know that our communities are falling short, right? Or we're not getting the medical attention that we necessarily needed. But to look at it holistically and think about all of the diseases that hit our communities and the impacts, the line that you can draw to other major diseases such as the heart is just phenomenal. It's like people don't really understand like what it means to have high blood pressure or hypertension, whichever word you want to use. And so I think Dr. Vasquez's work is so important in getting that message out to our communities.
Dr.
Tom,
Velasquez?
can I follow up on that? 'Cause I think
Absolutely.
It was really
Absolutely.
nice.
Please.
So Sunday and others have kind of highlighted very eloquently the importance of this time and place we're living. So, in 6 months, today's the first day of summer. 6 months ago, approximately, we had emergency use authorization for vaccines in America that could address COVID. Think about that in 6 months. So very rapidly, this issue of how we access care and the impact of what the American Heart Association has highlighted as the elements of racism that have impacted people's response to opportunities and information. That is in our, as you said, Sunday, it's in our faces. We see it now like we've never really probably seen it before. I think when we talk about the fact that 40% of all African American men over the age of 20 will have hypertension. Think about it, 40% will have hypertension. But that's a chronic issue, and it plays its part insidiously, terribly over decades in families, presenting late by stroke or with heart failure, or even, and we kind of can put that off to the side because it doesn't happen in your face like it's been happening with COVID. But COVID is this really remarkable, I hate to say it, opportunity, because it has affected so many people, but we can't take advantage of this opportunity because we have in 6 months highlighted the challenges that we face with chronic conditions like cardiovascular disease and diabetes that have laid dormant in people's minds for a long time. Now we know about access to care. It's all great and good. We invent new vaccines and we put them out there, and by the way, they're free. But that doesn't change the reality that people have different ways of accessing it. They may have a different understanding of its impact. They may have social support networks that need to be that may feed into misinformation or lack of confidence. So it is really important to kind of link these two situations, because we have COVID as an acute example of how social determinants of health have played out in the lives of our communities in a 6 months, 9 months window, which, by the way, has been happening for years and decades along all these other diseases that, as Reverend Perry mentioned, really kill more people, chronically.
Dr. Velasquez, let me ask somewhat of a challenging question and also share it with everyone else, because even people that are striving to eat better or to exercise more, we hear that don't smoke, we hear the various regimens and things that people should do. But how do we even support people that are striving to make these changes in their lifestyle? But then they may not see, as you say, immediate changes, but they may not be aware that this is a disciplined life. You do it repeatedly for as a lifestyle, not for just like taking a pill. But how do we support people in your mind that may have made changes or are beginning to make changes or have become disenchanted with the sacrificing from eating the cake that Reverend Clayton might like to eat every day?
I personally suffered from the same challenges. I'll say that. I should be stepping away from the cake more often than I have been recently, but I'll get better. I think I would answer that by saying, first, there's patience. You have to have patience with each other, with individuals, and I would say you got to connect the dots, like has been mentioned. You need to make the connections. Say, hey, this effect. Your father who died, and I'm not talking your father. My father recently passed a few years ago, but your family member who died of stroke. Well, that actually was related to that hypertension that happened over the last 40 years. That is just this, these connecting the dots, this education period. And then the last thing I would say is as an educator myself, but also those who might do it at different age groups, we know repetition is what, you need to repeat stuff over and over and over again in different ways, using different formats. Different people learn using different. You have to be creative in how to get the information out. That's what I love about the Cultural Ambassadors program, which is I think they've been bringing that, what we've had, I think, historically in the medical community, a relative lack of creativity around how to get stuff out of our nice ivory towers. And I think partnering with the cultural ambassadors, really helps us kind of do the right thing. I mean, I would say so.
Reverend Perry, Reverend Clayton, and Sunday, about the support question. Tisha, and I'd like to kind of ask you to kind of weigh in on that also, about, because this support question, showing the love and nurturing love and creating really gets a loving environment is so key. But I just wonder, Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton and Sunday and Tisha, if you'd like to kind of comment on that as well.
Tom, I want to say that I think that, having the information is an issue. I mean, we can all say we need to be informed, but the process is how do we bring that to fruition?
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that? I think that what YCCI has done is two things. One, it has helped us to be able to get a message out, and to get a message out through our newspaper, through this show, and through our churches and through our community partners. And I think that that's something that really we need to put a lot of money behind and a lot of time behind. Also, I want to say that this partnership with Yale has helped us not only to look at where we are, but how we can get to beyond where we are in terms of research, in terms of genetics, in terms of blood draws and samplings, and having researchers like Dr. Velasquez to come into our communities so that maybe we can find some medical solutions to some of these problems. And again, Dr. Velasquez is absolutely correct. Racism is at the bottom of this. We don't want to talk about it, but it is. And it's structural, it's institutional, and it's something that we're going to have to really look at and acknowledge. Maybe if we do that, maybe more institutions and more businesses will, during this Black Lives Matter movement, help us to come together to build up some partners that will help us address this issue.
And as mentioned, we're going to spend the last 10 or 15 minutes on the upcoming, and I'll use the term exciting opportunities for us to participate in the clinical trial. Reverend Clayton, on that topic though, about the nurturing and providing support to, I guess, helping people maintain their momentum. Any thoughts on that regard, in Sunday as well?
Well, I want to go back to a word that Dr. Vasquez used, that patience. Not a word that most people don't care for. It's something that I don't usually have much of myself, but patience in terms of getting us better. It takes 20, 30 years for health to deteriorate. And people think if they exercise for a couple of months that things will reverse. This is the new message have to be, we have to start this with the infants so that they will develop a taste for fruits and vegetables instead of cake and ice cream. So much that the thing that I love so well. And then if we can do that, preach that, share that, so that, and tell them that you'll live longer, you'll feel better, you have less issues if you eat right. And then not only eating correctly, more vegetables, less meat, less sugars. You heard it right, Dr. Perry. We're there. And it's work. Not only is the methods work, but it works for parents to make sure that a child has a rounded meal, versus it's easy because the kid is from McDonald's and Burger King. in pieces.
Yes. Yes.
You understand? I'm a witness. So these are the areas that not only do we need to talk about it and share it and on this media, but we have at the level in our home, we have to start at the youngest level so that we will become a healthy race.
And Sunday and Tisha, any comments or elaboration on that? Because even if you kind of just repeat the same words that have been mentioned, I don't think we can share these words too often. But I wondered, Sunday, if you had any reflections or comments.
I think what I've heard, and I think I agree with it, repetitiveness, right? So people to continuously do things to help them. Communicating in different ways is so important because not everyone receives information in the same way. Everyone learns differently. In moderation, right? So Reverend Clayton was talking about not eating meat, but in moderation. I think it's important that as we begin to talk to our communities and help our communities understand what is happening within our race, everyone's going to take that information differently. Some will receive it, some will not receive it. The way we communicate that information, it has to be different because, again, not everyone receives that information the same. It's very difficult when you think about changing someone's habit of what they're used to doing, or the way they're used to eating, or the way they're used to exercising and so forth. So you just can't like go in and say, oh, you need to do X, Y, and Z. It's all about how you communicate with those people and what works for them, right? And I think many of times I've heard Reverend Perry say this is that, we have to meet people where they are. So meet them at the space of where they are, and then, diversify our approaches that way. And I think we do that within the YCCI. We take a look at that. We come together as a team. We talk about what would work or what might not work for certain areas, certain communities. And so I think we do a great job at doing that. So this is no different than that, right? And so whether it's heart disease, cancer, what have you, healthy eating, exercising, it's just the way you educate and approach our particular communities is going to be important.
Excellent. Tisha, I wanted to bring you in here because as we were talking before we went on the show, and I don't think, hopefully you will not mind my mentioning that you've devoted several decades, I mean, not like years, but decades. I know you're only 16, but you were creamy. But this topic, and I'm halfway joking because I'm kind of a media addict. I'll use that term in a good way. And sometimes when your mind continues to focus on a various topic, it could be draining and sometimes even depressing. But you've remained enthusiastic and pioneering about we can improve people. We can improve as a civilization. We can improve as individuals from a health standpoint, where we can do more. We can do it better. And I guess wondered if you had any thoughts in that regard before we move to, because I do want to talk about Dr. Velasquez about genetics and even some early warning symptoms, and then we want to wind up with the upcoming exciting clinical trial.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm always really excited about and enthusiastic about with the ambassadors is that Sunday said not only do they focus on meeting people where they are, it's this idea that we're not always dependent. The community has so many resources that if we just tap into those resources the way that we have with the ambassadors, and the ambassadors have the knowledge, and people like you, Tom, and through the show have the knowledge that we might reach a different audience. We might get individuals to understand that they have a role to play in their healthcare as well, and in how they access healthcare. And I think one of the things that excites us most about the partnership with the ambassadors is it makes it very personal. I know you yourself, as we were thinking about some of the prostate cancer research, you shared your story.
Yes.
And I think sometimes it's hard for individuals to make a personal change or a commitment to change until something impacts them personally. And with heart disease, I think it's actually terrifying, the rates of, when you think about not only hypertension risk, but you think about the risk of actual chronic heart disease in the minority community, and not only in men, but in women as well. And you think about all of the downstream impacts of that. You think about stroke. I think a lot of people don't think about their neurologic capacity, if with uncontrolled hypertension and other things, that it impacts where your life will be and the quality of your life well beyond the years that you're thinking about it. And so I think all of those things are just so important. And what happens with the ambassadors program is Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton and Sunday and Dr. Velasquez have already mentioned is the ambassadors are able to help us carry those messages in a very different way than Yale had the decade before we had the ambassadors. We're able to have shows like this. We're able to have the newsletters. We're able to have conversations. We're able to have events at the churches and out in the community where individuals can ask questions. They can think about all of these things, because I think sometimes when we just talk about the stats, it's overwhelming and it's sort of numbing. You get numb to the fact of thinking that, well, a lot of people have high blood pressure, so what? They're all living with high blood pressure, so what? But the so what could be, well, you could have a heart attack or you could have a stroke. And then what happens from, what is the quality of your life after that? How do you have to change this? Because then you'll be forced to make those changes that you didn't want to make before with a different quality of life. And I think those all become really important factors, and factors that the ambassadors just help us message in a way that I think that, and reach individuals and reach people, as Sunday said, where they are, but in a way that we wouldn't be able to without them. And especially as it relates to advances in care and the consideration of research as part of that.
Indeed. So you didn't want to address your personal journey, but I'm going to get you next time about what's kept you so involved with that, because I think you're always so gracious with your public persona, but people need to know that this is not a one-off. This is a decade. This has been a life commitment for you. So I appreciate your sharing what you've shared, but you have not escaped me asking you more directly next time on the next show. So let the record show.
The record reflects the tone.
Dr. Velasquez, let's jump to it, because I want to leave sufficient time. I did want to talk about genetics, and we might come back to that, but you have an upcoming opportunity, because I want people to know that this is moving forward. We can really look at history, but we're also making history in terms of clinical trials. So chat with us a little bit about this, really participating in a historic making endeavor in terms of this upcoming clinical trial that you're involved with.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to talk about it, but it's not my work. It's many people on this phone call or just their work and more, and also my team and my colleagues and my own faculty. So I guess I'll frame this by saying that we think of clinical trials the perspective of a new agent, like a new vaccine, that we test to make sure it's effective, and then we put it into arms, right? That's one type of very critically important clinical trial that allows us to develop, with the oversight of the FDA and other places, new therapeutics that changes how we take care of patients. But there's also a fairly large portfolio of important clinical research, and I increasingly am involved in this, where we talk not only about the efficacy, establishing new drugs or new therapeutics, but also the effectiveness and the impact and the implementation of the information into communities. And I think that is just as important, because we can have all these new therapeutics until the accountants come home, but if we don't put them into people who are going to need it, we haven't really won, right? We haven't solved anything. We just haven't had a lot of new therapies. So this concept of implementation research is, I think, what we're embarking on together a little bit, this implementation clinical trial that we're doing together. And so this is still early days. So I will hope to put a plug in that maybe you'll invite us back and we can talk about how this is advanced into the future. But I can give you a high level, and then I'll have my partners add to that. So as we mentioned, 40% of African Americans are going to have hypertension. It's a known fact. I will make it personal. I will say that Father's Day was yesterday. It was probably one of the first Father's Day in a few years that I've been able to enjoy it without some deep sadness, because my father had passed away a few years ago. And now I look at it more with a very positive perspective. You know, my father was diagnosed as an immigrant who didn't know English, was very, very severe hypertension in his 30s. And he died at 84. 50 years of hypertension treatment in a person who didn't have the means, because we were certainly not in any way, he was not, would you say, properly educated, and he wasn't necessarily wealthy by any means. But he lived a life that was quite full, and I can't imagine my life without him. But that was in a way based on the fact that he had the fortune to have access to care, and took advantage of it, I would say. So now we are in a position where we know that hypertension affects our community. It's becoming, if anything, more common because our population is aging, and we have other risk factors like obesity that are unfortunately going in the wrong direction. That highlight. So when hypertension happens, the heart adapts because it has to. It's like a muscle; it has to push out, right, against blood pressure is high. So that's like the weight, and so that heart adaptation lets it become thickened. It thickens. The heart thickens, and that eventually is adaptive initially, but maladaptive long term. So why do I raise this? Well, that maladaptive response, that thickening, is very common. We see when we image individuals who had high blood pressure, who haven't been effectively managed. And that happens, obviously, as we mentioned, commonly in the African-American population. So we have to identify those individuals because there's a tremendous opportunity for improvement. If we can even reduce the thickening of the heart, that can actually happen. We can reduce the thickening. We treat people effectively. At the same time that's happening, we are learning about new biology. And it is particularly among West African descendants, about 4% of the population have genetic changes. Why they exist, we don't really know, but genetic changes that lead to abnormal protein deposition in muscle, in tissues like the heart muscle. And that can cause thickening too. So then when you ask yourself, when you see someone in front of you who has high blood pressure, is there thickening just because their hypertension wasn't as well controlled as it should be, and we should just focus on that? Or should we be also looking to evaluate whether they have another condition, genetically impacted condition, that has a completely different treatment pathway? Well, we have treatments for them now. We have ways to diagnose the difference. We have ways to say this person has this abnormal genetic condition that has protein entering the muscle and causing it to look as thick as someone who just has plain old hypertension. And we would offer them different treatments. And in fact, sometimes the treatments may be opposed. You're treating for high blood pressure, but they actually may make their condition worse if they have this kind of condition, genetic condition. So with the community and our cultural ambassadors, we are together developing a program, a trial to understand how to implement that information into the community and identify individuals effectively and link those individuals to the right care and to see how that how that changes people's outcomes. Who do we diagnose that we would have not ever found? And as part of that, we are actually going to bring resources in the community for early screening, not just blood pressure, which is important. That's actually one of our key goals, but also to screen for this abnormal genetic condition that exists actually quite commonly in the African-American population. So that's the teaser. And I think we're pretty excited because I think it can harness technologies that now exist in the palm of our hand. We can bring imaging to church fairs and look for that thickening, and that could point us in a different direction. We can measure, obviously, blood pressure in the communities, and we are now developing point of care genetic testing that we need to test and see how impactful that is and how can it be implemented. So we can find these genetic factors and then at least make people aware of it. So a lot of things happening at once. But again, part of what has been wonderful for me is the fact that this is not my study. Actually, I kind of suggested an idea like this to the cultural ambassadors a couple of years ago when I first arrived in New Haven, and they took it and ran with it, and I brought it back to us that we want something like this. And now we're in the midst of hopefully developing it together and then implementing it together for the future. So I've talked too much. I have a tendency to talk too long, but I'm going to stop and let others kind of provide more information about this study.
Reverend Perry, that's your clue, your cue, and also definitely Dr. Velasquez, you'll be back at your anytime. That it's an open door policy. There's room in the inn here at the Ficklin Church. But Reverend Perry.
Well, let me just start by simply saying first about, education and re-education is part of what we're doing. And I say that because we're educated, but there's some things that we need to be re-educated about and to look at, and nutrition is one of those things. It's not that, we eat the wrong food. Sometimes we don't look at what's on the label of the cans. We don't know how much sugar is in the soda, how much salt is in the soup. And we don't think about it because when you're at the bottom of the social order, you really don't think highly enough of yourself to make this a priority. So we have these major holidays like Juneteenth, but that's not going to be as significant as a study like this that's going to save lives. And so we are happy with what Dr. Velasquez and ambassadors are working toward, because it's hopefully will save lives and re-educate us on the importance of being a part of research, because that's significant. And looking at genetics as a part of that research, and all of these things should fall into place. But again, it's the messaging. It is the school taking the initiative along with scientists to come into the community and to work on something like this. That makes us all want to shout hallelujah.
All right. Sunday and Reverend Clayton, just before I come to you, Dr. Velasquez, share with us the timetable. I mean, I really appreciate your giving us the teaser and kind of the, if not the first look, an early look, an embryonic look of what's going to transpire. But what's your sense for the timetable and how can people get, and Tisha also, how can people get involved? Dr. Velasquez, what's the timetable?
I'll do it quickly. I mean, I think we have all the building blocks. That's actually come together very nicely. And now it's assembling the working groups. I mean, we obviously, we need to engage with our colleagues to actually put this into action. And so my sense is that the building blocks are assembled. The commitments have been made, I believe, strongly. The leadership is aligned. And now we have working groups who are committed to kind of starting to come together to develop this community-based research trial. And I am hopeful that we are actually doing community screening and starting this process by early spring at the latest. That's my goal. I know Tisha's going to probably have a heart attack here just listening to me, but this is important. We can't be delayed by bureaucracy. We have to kind of move forward. So that's my personal goal is that we are actually having screening fairs and engaging with our community partners in bringing information about these conditions of heart muscle thickening and its causes into the community by late winter, early spring.
Excellent. And Tisha, does that sound in keeping with your magic wand as well? From a
I think so. I mean, I think that we'll be in planning for the next couple of months to make sure that we've got it right from the perspective of the community and meeting them where they are with the ambassadors at the table as co-designers of the studies. And then once we get the regulatory approvals, I think that's a great timeline. Hopefully we'll be out just in time for the holidays to think about the cakes and pies before they get consumed at Thanksgiving.
And Reverend Clayton, and any thoughts about that? Because Reverend Velasquez, it seems to me there's this word involved with the various hats you wear in terms of translational research, and some people might not know what that means, but you have embodied and explicated what translational research means. It's, I mean, not to coin a phrase, but it's power to the people. But Reverend Clayton, any thoughts in this regard?
I yield my time for my comments here to Sister Sunday.
All right, and that's the gentlemanly thing to do. That's the gentlemanly thing to do. I second that endorsement. Sunday.
Wow, Reverend Perry. Hi, Reverend Clayton. You yield your time to me. What else is there to say, right? I think it's been said, right? So the leadership is in place. We need to come together as small groups, and really take a look at how we want to communicate to the folks, meet them where they are, and just move forward with this. This is important information, and it's an important trial that will help us, right? And so I've always said, when I started with YCCI, my God, like, I was walking blindly, honestly. I mean, and to someone's point, I don't know who said it, I mean, it's not like I'm not educated. I am educated, but my God, like, I didn't know what I know today as it relates to my own health and my own medication that I take. And, you know, with my blood pressure, high blood pressure, it's just amazing, like, how you can take charge of your life and your body when you have the information that you need in order to do that. And so I'll leave it at that. And so I think it's going to be real important that as we get out to the communities and really share this information, to help people understand, like, what does it mean, like, taking care of your heart and being aware of that. So I'm excited. I can't wait to get started.
I said it, Sunday. It's re-educate. I said it, Sunday, in case you forgot.
Oh, you said it? Oh, Dr. Perry said it, re-educate.
Let the record show. Let the record show.
Let the record show.
We have about 90 seconds, and Harry will play the music, and we know that he's being kicked off. And definitely, Dr. Velasquez, looking forward to chatting with you again. But as we conclude, Dr. Velasquez, and until Harry plays the music, for someone's listening that in terms of what are some of the symptoms or signs in terms of cardiovascular disease, and someone's concerned, you share with us if you would. Again, you're a doctor, so you can speak to this, and you're not wishing that people had these symptoms and signs. But what are some of the things?
I'm gonna take advantage of my probably 45 seconds now. Very, you know, I think people should not ignore certain things. And I would say I'll leave it with this: if you're short of breath, that's not normal. It could be because you're heavy, but you need to work on that, and we need to help you with that. So don't blame it on something else. Get it checked out. If your heart's fluttering, that's not normal. Get it checked out. You have chest pain. You say, well, I'll just sit around more because when I sit around, it doesn't happen. Well, that's not normal. Get it checked out. If your legs are swollen and your abdomen is swollen, you can put your finger and you can leave a dent. You know, that doesn't mean you necessarily have heart disease, but you need to get it checked out. So those are the things that if you see it, you need to get it checked out. We're also been talking about the things that you can't see. You can't see if your heart's thick. You can't see unless you have a machine that tells you it. You can't see that your blood pressure is high. You need to get those checked out. So, you know, not only be aware of your own body, as Sunday mentioned, but also recognize that there are some things that until you get them evaluated, you wouldn't know. These are silent killers, so they have to be evaluated. So that's what I'll end with that. Don't try to blame something else. There are folks here who can help and get you information and diagnostic studies.
Excellent. Everyone, thank you so much, everyone. It's been a pleasure as always.
Thank you.
Hope to resume.
As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission. I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions.
This is Harry Jones, and you're listening to WNHHLP,
Better go in the right direction. In the moment you're stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains. Haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. I'm never gonna give up. Fall down, I just gotta get up.